Hi and welcome. I'm Waki, and on today's episode, we'll be making this Ankara and crepe gown. Please, before watching, I'd love you to kindly subscribe and like my video. Thank you. And so I have this package in it. I have crepe fabric 2 yards, lining fabric, although I didn't use it, and of course the style of this dress, which is the Ankara fabric. I've cut the front parts of my dress and I'm just pinning down to secure. I'll make a video on how I went about the cutting later. I'm just marking the neck width on my dress, which is 3.5 inches, and the neck depth. So I'll use my French curve to connect it and cut it out. At the base, I'm just making a slight curve by marking 2 inches and just joining the curve and cutting it. So for the back, I've already marked 1 inch as my zipper allowance or folding in allowance. I didn't use zip, so I'll be using it as my folding allowance. I've marked my neck depth and neck width, which is 1 inch and 3.5 inches respectively, and I'm just cutting it out. Once I'm done, I'll mark 2 inches and also make a curve at the hem as I did for the front. For the rose flower part of my dress, I'm just going to fold over the Ankara fabric in bias. That is, I'm using the true bias, that's angle 45 degrees. So you'll be using this illustration I'm making as a guide. I'm just cutting all the way through, and since I folded this fabric before marking the 5 inches, I'll slit it through to have two 5-inch pieces of the bias. When you unfold the pieces, you're just going to, when you want to join to have a longer piece, you fold it in a T shape as I've shown below. I'm going ahead to cut out the 4 inches part as well, and I'll be joining using the method I showed earlier. I also did this for the black piece of fabric I used, but I did it off camera. Moving over to the base of the rose flower, I've cut a piece of fabric about 15 inches by 15 inches, and I've folded it over in half lengthwise, just ironing, and again crosswise. I'm using the radius of 6 inches for this project, but you can use any width you desire, but as a general rule, the larger your circle, the smaller the width of your rose fabric. I'm just opening it up and finishing up with some haste to give it stability. I've got this on another fabric and I'm just spinning down. I'm going to sew round and leave about 2 inches to turn over. Once I'm done sewing, I'm going to notch. Once I'm done notching, I'm going to turn the fabric out and iron it well. Once I'm done ironing, I'm going to sew the small place closed. I'm done with that and I'm folding into two to iron both lengthwise and crosswise, so I'll get accurate center lines, or should I say guidelines, for my project. I'm using my ruler to draw out these guidelines. And I'm doing this on the other part as well. So we are going to start marking our guidelines by, I'm using 1/2 inch. Again, this is not a fixed measurement. You can use whatever you want depending on the width of the fabric you cut earlier. I'm done making my first circle. And again, from that point, I'm measuring half and joining with my initial circle instead of marking away. Please just watch carefully. I'm going to mark half an inch around. So to make my work faster and easier, I went ahead to mark half inch at different points, and I just joined the lines. Once I was done, I measured around the flounce to know the actual length, and I had about 186 inches. So the fabrics we made earlier should measure about 1.5 more, but mine was 1.6, so you can work with 1.5 to 2 inches. That is 186 inches times 1.5 to 1.2. So I measured with the fabric I had at Sana, and I had about that. So I'm going ahead to place the bias fabric which we use for our rose design. I'm just plating it on my machine. Once I was done with these 5-inch parts, I moved over to the 4-inch parts, and I started with my black piece of fabric. I left about 15 inches on pleated. So I've started sewing the pleated part of my fabric, and I'm just going to follow the guidelines. Note, I'm not starting from inside. I started outside. That's the best practice to use while sewing this. Alright, I'm done with the 5-inch part. I'm just sewing on the 4-inch parts, and I'm taking my time to work on this fabric. Once I'm done, this is the 14 to 15-inch part I left without pleating, so I'm using my thread and needle to tack it. Meanwhile, I have sewn the edge close already, so you need to do that to have a neat finish. I'm just making gather stitches and sewing finally to my rose piece. I'm making sure it is well placed so that it will be aesthetically pleasing. Once I'm done, I'm going to tack to secure and cut off my. I've grabbed the front part of my dress, and I'm just ironing to get the midpoints. This will serve as a guideline for when I'm placing my rose fabric for sewing. So I'm going ahead to pin it down. Once I'm done pinning, I'm going to sew it as shown. Alright, I'm on my sewing machine now, and I've sewn these parts. For the back, I've already stitched on the allowance, and I've left about 6 to 7 inches as my back slit. I'm ironing these parts by opening it up and just making it lie flat. So I've folded in the edge, and I'm just pinning it down. Once I'm done pinning, I'll sew as shown, and I'm ironing it to give me a better or professional look. At this point, I'm placing the shoulders together and pinning it so that it will guide me when I'm sewing. I'm done sewing, and I'll be setting this aside. For my sleeve, I'm just marking 7 inches away from the hem, and I'm going to be joining this line using my ruler. For the piece that will house the drawstring fabric, I've just cut out this piece of fabric about 1.5 inches. You can do 2 or even smaller, but 1.5 4.5 worked out just fine for me. I've pressed the fabric into two first, then I'm opening up and pressing in half towards the center. You might need to steam press so you get an efficient result. So I'm just pressing towards the center and I'm repeating same for the other side. I'm taking my time. Once I've gotten my desired result, I'm just folding the vertical parts also to conceal this raw edge, and I've ironed it. I'm doing so for other fabrics, and once I'm done, I've marked the center point on the sleeve on the line I marked earlier, and I'm going to pin down, but making sure I arrange it properly. Once that is done, you are just going to sew till you get to the center, but be careful not to sew the vertical seam, because that's where the drawstring or rope is going to come out from. I'm done sewing, and it's just a matter of cutting out the excess. For the drawstring fabric itself, I'm using this bias fabric that it was a part of what I used for the rosebuds. It's about 1 inch in length or in width and 17 inches in length. So I've folded it over in two, and I'm folding towards the center before finally folding again. Please just look at the illustration so you understand better. Once I'm done, I'm going to sew down. I've done this for 4 different pieces of fabric, because I'll be using 2 on one hand and 2 on the other. Now I'm done. I'm going to use my safety pin to pass the bias piece through the hole we created earlier. I'm passing it from the side, so once it gets to the center, I'm going to be pulling it out. I'll use the pin to secure it at the side. I'll repeat same for the other side, and once I'm done, I'll stitch the sides down, and to the hem of the fabric you're going to fold it down and sew to give a neat finish. I'm just notching the center of my shoulder, and I'll place the sleeve on it and pin down so that it will be easy for me when sewing. For the collar of my dress, maybe I'll make another video to show details on how I made it. So I'm just marking 1/2 inch from the bottom as the base. I've rolled it using a ruler, and I folded this fabric into 2, so it was about 18 inches or more. And the first point I marked was my back neck width, which was about 4 inches. So this one I'm marking is the final collar width, which I've added about final collar length rather, which I've added about 1 inch to it, so that I'll have enough for my sewing. So at the bottom, I've raised it by 1/2 inch, like I made a curve that is 1/2 inch at the bottom, and I've repeated same for the upper parts. So I'm just joining in this line, Meanwhile, my collar width is about 2.5. So once I'm done sewing, I'll have 1.5. I'll cut out. I'm just cutting this out. Alright, I'm just notching so I'll know the center. I've cut out 2 pieces of this fabric, and on the second piece, which is the under collar, I'm just trimming away 1/4 of an inch so the fabric does not come up on the top collar. Okay, once I'm done, I've ironed a stay on one part, so I'm placing the two of them together, pinning it down. Once I'm done, I'm going to sew down using 1/2 inch allowance. I'm done sewing and I'm placing the center part on the center of my neck. I'm pinning it all the way through. I've gone ahead to sew that part using my sewing machine. Once I'm done, I'm folding the fabric. I'm folding the collar parts into 2 and stitching. I've stitched that part, I'm cutting it out. Then I'll turn that part out. Once I'll use my scissors to straighten out the part I've brought out. All that is left is folding it and pinning down. After which, I'm going to sew it on my sewing machine. I'm done sewing and I'll be joining the sides starting from my sleeve to the edge. Once I'm done, I'll fold in the hem of my garment and my dress is ready.